At first I was gonna do Uno, a stream of Uno. I decided not to do Uno today, do my break. The reason why I'm doing this video like this, because I'm gonna put this on Facebook and on YouTube. This is gonna be about what happened to a young lady that I didn't know personally. A young lady named Hannah Kimura. Good chance I'm pronouncing her name wrong because she's Japanese and I don't speak Japanese, but I know she was a wrestler for a wrestling promotion since 2016 called Stardom. But she's been wrestling because her mother was a wrestler. For a while now, everybody's been talking about cyberbullying and how cyberbullying is. As a kid growing up, I grew up as a military kid. My dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot, but most of my time was spent in Abilene, Texas as a kid. 3rd grade to 6th grade, middle school, and high school. I graduated from Cooper High School. As a kid in the 8th grade, I was bullied. You know, I'm about 143 now. I'm not really no bigger than what I was in middle school. The difference is I was skinnier in high school and smaller. I was about maybe 5'4". I'm 5'6" now, and I was way smaller and skinnier than what I am now. I didn't have muscles like I do now. You know, I'm not a big person. In high school I wasn't that big, but you got to realize this is back in the 80s. Doing the civil rights movement ended around late 60s. So I was born in 1970. So the 80s is only about 14, 15 years apart from the civil rights movement, meaning the Ku Klux Klan still walked up and down the streets on my military base. Racism still exists. My father's main goal for me and my sister was for us to make it, to be old enough to take care of ourselves. So when I was bullied in 8th grade, my father's advice was always, hey, if he put his hands on you, you put your hands right back on him. That was his advice when it came to being bullied. Because good chance most of you in your childhood, even if it's elementary, high school, middle school, you was bullied. But something in your life that made you stand up from being bullied. See, but now with the internet and cyberbullying, I'm seeing so many news stories of young girls, and from black to Korean to Hannah, who was 22 years old, literally committing suicide because they've been bullied way worse than what I was bullied in middle school. Yeah, the kid that bullied me, I think he was white. I think when it was all said and done, I found out that one of my friends who was black was bullying him. And he was being disciplined or beaten by his father. So, most bullies are being beat by somebody else, and that's when they become a bully. Me, I never really thought about being a bully or any of that when I was in school, because I wouldn't want nobody bullying me. But I was bullied when I was in middle school. Not to compare my personal experience with what Hannah was going through, because according to news sources, she was getting death threats, all because of a reality show that she did back in January, and her getting upset about somebody took her wrestling gear and shrunk it. I know the wrestling gear that a lot of these women wear, none of these men wear, are custom made. So I can understand her being upset about a wrestling gear getting shrinked. But to have that much hatred for somebody to where you want them to die from coronavirus, or to die, you hate them that much, or that person feels that they were alone and nobody cared about them. So they didn't want to be alive anymore. They didn't want to be human no more because they felt no one cared about them. When I was getting bullied back in the 80s, this back 84, 85, no, I felt the same way. That at nights I would cry because I was getting bullied by this one person every day. And he would hit me, he would bully me, make fun of me. I know back in middle school in 8th grade, I got into Spanish. And during that time, I went to a predominantly all-white school. So everybody at that school, in that Spanish class I was in when I was in 8th grade, was all white. I was the only black person. And when it was time to learn the colors in Spanish, as we all know, the word black in Spanish is negro. And the bully was in the same Spanish class I was in. And everybody there laughed every time I said negro. Eventually, during that time period, this is when I started getting into wrestling. And the reason why I bring this up, because I'm trying to make this quick and to the point of why I'm bringing this up. This is when Deep South Wrestling came out. Because I was in Abilene, Texas, and Deep South Wrestling, Ric Flair, the Four Horsemen, woo, they were the big thing back in the 80s. And Deep South Wrestling would come to Abilene, Texas every now and then. I would ask my dad, this is when I was a teenager, hey, you take me to go see wrestling. My mom would say, hey, take him. My father was never into wrestling. He was like, this is a bunch of men walking around with their underwears on, touching themselves. So he wasn't into that. So wrestling for me was mainly just on the TVs. And the Four Horsemen, everybody, black, white, they loved the Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen. But when it came to me, the person that stood out to me was a Japanese man, a Japanese wrestler named the Great Muta. And the Great Muta, he wasn't like Ric Flair. It was something about the Great Muta that made him, to me, stand out from the rest of the wrestlers that were out in that time period. And I literally looked up to the Great Muta as inspiration during that time when I was being bullied, even though it was just in my 8th grade. But because of the Great Muta, and the reason why I say this is because of the Great Muta, he inspired me in some way, shape, or form to stand up for myself. I started lifting weights around that time period. Started practicing, I was into comic books, so this comic book had like an ad for, hey, to build muscle and to build weight, lift weights. And I ordered it, couldn't afford it. I was just a kid, didn't have a job. And he sent me a bill. And my father was like, okay, you really want to do this? I paid for it. He paid for it. Let me use his weights because my dad had his weights. I still got them same weights today. And I started lifting weights. And also in that catalog, it had self-defense stuff. A martial art called savate, which is a French martial art. And I started doing that, just practicing it, doing the kicks. Because the Great Muta inspired me to do all of that. And then when I got into the 9th grade, because this was around the time period when the 9th grade was still middle school, but now the 9th grade during this time period was going to high school. So they was initiating 9th graders. And for some reason, my whole 9th grade year, I never got initiated. Because it was like when I went from 8th grade to 9th grade, my whole mannerism changed. I started lifting weights. I started practicing savate, started doing, that style of martial arts. All because the Great Muta inspired me to do that. Even though he might think, okay, I don't know the Great Muta don't know me, but what he did in the ring inspired me to stand up for myself. Now, going forward, I watched the Great Muta off and on during the 90s, doing WCW, WWE. Really wasn't a big wrestling fan. I was more into women wrestling because I also grew up watching Glow. That's why I got into women wrestling, because of Glow. But to make a long story short, because I only got about 15, 20 minutes to do this, that's when I started watching wrestling after Gail Kim and Jazz and them left WWE. I started watching wrestling. I wasn't really into it. It was something about the Great Muta that made me interested in wrestling. And it just wasn't there anymore. So I stopped. I got into radio, got into construction, and did construction, started doing YouTube in 06. voicing my opinion about certain stuff like I used to do. Watch some of my old YouTube videos from 06, 07. I just voiced my opinion about soul music and stuff like that. I really wasn't into wrestling. I gave it up. Then in 2018, this is when WWE, they had their Tough Enough in 2010. I watched Tough Enough and Total Diva. It really wasn't back into wrestling. But then they had Evolution in 2018. Signed up for it because I wanted to see the women, this first so-called big pay-per-view women event for all women wrestling, even though there's been WEW, Women Extreme Wrestling. That's how Mickie James got her start. So I was still off and on watching women wrestling, mainly like WEW. And that's how I knew Mickie James before she became Mickie James, because she wrestled in WEW. But this is when another person inspired me to watch women wrestling again. And that person was Kana. The person you know as Asuka. So I started watching Asuka, but I left WWE because I still watched the women's division, but I really wasn't into what they were doing. So I started looking up Kana and what she did, and that's how I discovered Io Shirai and her sister. And I started watching Io Shirai videos on YouTube. And with as YouTube, they start using your what you're viewing as suggestions on your feed. So then automatically, when I started looking up Kana, watching some of her matches, old matches, where she was fighting, wrestling against men. That's when I started watching Io Shirai. Then after Io Shirai, that's when I discovered Stardom. And then, I really still wasn't into wrestling. I like Japanese wrestling because of Great Muta. But then the match that made me fall in love with women wrestling again was the match between Julia of Stardom and Hannah. And this was the first time I ever saw Hannah wrestle. And Galilea, I think she was new to Stardom, so she was new. But Hannah, after I did some research, she'd been around wrestling because her mother was a wrestler. She spit in Galilea's face, and they were speaking Japanese, going back and forth. That backstage brawl that they had, Hannah and Galilea had, made me fall in love with wrestling again. And I started watching Stardom and never stopped watching Stardom ever since. Never stopped, because it was something about Hannah and that match between her and Galilea. Because at first I liked the Galilea, Julia. But when Hannah came out and she spit in her face, it reminded me of the days of the Great Muta and how he used to wrestle against Ric Flair and Sting. And win or lose, Great Muta put up a great performance. This is before I thought wrestling was real. It wasn't choreographed or promoted the side of your face. I thought it was real because I was a 13, 14-year-old kid. But was the match that made me fall in love with Hannah as a wrestler and Galilea. So when I heard that Saturday, it was a normal Saturday, I got up. Didn't know nothing about the death threats or the bullying on it, because every time you see Hannah, she was definitely during the quarantine. They were doing videos every week. Her and her squad, the Tokyo Cyber Squad was doing live videos every Tuesday, Wednesday. And I watch them. They were entertaining. They would talk about, I don't understand Japanese, but it was just entertaining to watch Hannah and them talk about what they were going through and what they were doing during that match and what they were thinking about during that match. Excuse me. But Hannah was a great inspiration because she had it. Back before I started watching, Evolution, Asuka again, I started thinking about whatever happened to the Great Muta. This is back in maybe 2017, 18. I just wanted to know what happened to the Great Muta because I saw Ric Flair. He was getting older, and I was like, okay, what happened to the wrestler that I was really into as a kid growing up? I thought, okay, he'd be around the same age as Ric Flair. But when he went back to Japan, he started his own wrestling promotion called Wrestling One. And right now he's 57, 58 years old. He's not that old. He's still wrestling. He had a wrestling promotion, Wrestling One. he discontinued it in April of this year. But I knew there was a reason why I liked it, Hannah, and why she stood out, just like the Great Muta stood out. Because once I found out about Hannah and started watching her, like most people, I Googled her, just like I did with Io Shirai, and that's how I found out about her sister and how they used to wrestle with Kana as a tag team and all that. And I started watching that on YouTube of them wrestling, and how Io wrestled. I feel Io, in my opinion, wrestled way better in Stardom and in Japan than she ever is doing in WWE. It's not her fault, I know that, but I like watching her wrestle when she was in Japan still. And Hannah had that. She had the same thing that Muta had back. It was just something about it that makes you love watching wrestling. Definitely as a wrestling fan. And I'm not a big wrestling fan, but I love what I saw in Hannah. Hannah Kimura. She had it. And then when I found out she was also trained by Wrestling One, which is also was founded and was promoted by the promoter was Great Muta, the same person that inspired me as a kid. That's when I realized this is why she stands out. I don't know if Great Muta had anything to do with her teaching. I know that was his promotion. She was a part of it. She was trained at Wrestling One. But it shows that she had the same charisma, she had the same thing that made me attractive to the Great Muta, that inspired me to not be bullied anymore. That's what I saw in Hannah. That's what I saw when I saw that match between her and Galia or Julia. The spitting part, they had to consent to that. For a person to spit in somebody's face, that's disrespectful. But in that case, that backstage brawl that Hannah and Galia had made me love wrestling again. I've been watching Stardom ever since. So to see someone so young die like that, because she felt no one loved her. She just wanted to be loved, and no one. Cyberbullying is far worse than the bullying I had to experience. With my bullying, it was physical. Dad and the bully, he was being beaten by his dad, and the black guy was bullying him, so automatically he picked on the person that was weaker, like me. Because in high school and in middle school, I was not a big talker. I was very shy, very quiet. I didn't talk. So a lot of people thought I was a mute. They thought I didn't talk. They thought I was deaf until a teacher would ask me a question. Then when I speak, they were like, "You can talk?" So in high school, definitely in middle school, I was an easy mark because they saw me as weak. But once I got the inspiration from the Great Muta to stand up for myself and started lifting weights and started practicing Savat, even though I don't do it no more, I had a whole different, it was like my whole personality, I was still the same quiet, shy person, but now I was gaining muscle tone. I had more confidence in myself in 9th grade, in 10th grade, 11th grade, to where I never got initiated in 9th grade like every other freshman. They really didn't mess with me in 10th, 11th, 12th grade. So I just want to thank the Great Muta, because even though you don't know me, good chance you will never see this, you inspired me to stand up for myself when I was a kid. So I want to thank Kana, Io Shirai, Carrie, San, Stardom, the women of Stardom Wrestling. No matter, I know with y'all being in the spotlight, y'all get a lot of bullies, cyberbullying you. I know this. Because when you're in the spotlight like that, there's always going to be somebody out there that's jealous of what you are achieving in your life, because they're not achieving the same thing, or they're going through something and I'm not condoning the bully, but a lot of these bullies, they're just punks. A lot of them, men or women, they just being bullied because their parents are bullying them or somebody else is bullying them. So they feel they got to bully somebody that's weaker. And now with the cyberbullying, it's easier for them to do it behind a computer. What upsetted me more about Hannah's death is she felt that nobody loved her, that she was alone. That meant it was like Twitter didn't try to do anything to stop the cyberbullying. Even if you block a cyberbully, they just gonna try to make another account and keep bullying you. Just let it be known, my thoughts are with Hannah and her family, her mother, and all those that knew her. I just wanted to do this video to show you that, bullying is bullying. It's just not right. Because when I was bullied, I couldn't see myself bullying somebody else. Because it's just not in my characteristics. It's just not in my mindset to bully somebody or to pick on somebody. And I definitely want to thank the great Muda for inspiring me to stand up for myself when I was a kid. In the short time that I've knew of Hannah, she was an inspiration. And I know a lot of the fans out there saw her as an inspiration. And I want the women of Stardom to know, and I want Kana and all the women in the women wrestling, that there are fans out there that see you as inspirations. The ones that are being bullied, they look up to you, and you inspire them to stand up for themselves. Because just like Great Muda inspired me to stand up for myself. And I definitely want to thank Hannah Kimura for inspiring me to love wrestling again. Because if it wasn't for her, if it wasn't for Stardom, if it wasn't for Kana, if it wasn't for Io Shirai or Kairi Sane, I wouldn't be watching wrestling today. Because I pretty much gave up on it. But it was the women of Stardom and Hannah in that match with her and Galia that made me love wrestling again. And I definitely want to thank Hannah Kimura, because you inspired me to love wrestling again, women wrestling. And I thank you for that. I'm sad that you couldn't continue to build on that inspiration to other people, but I, for one, was inspired by that match, and after watching all your other matches that you did, you inspired me to love wrestling again when I had given up on women wrestling. At least I didn't cry. Saturday, I couldn't stop crying. And I could never understood why I was crying for someone that I've never met, never really knew other than what I saw on YouTube. But then when I realized it's because she reminds me so much of the Great Muda. Not to say that she's exactly like the Great Muda. She was her own person. And to see someone die like that at 22, has such a bright future ahead of her. She had it. And most wrestlers don't have it. They don't stand out like Hannah did. She stood out. Just like the Great Muda when I was a kid. He stood out. And that's what inspired me. And I know now that she's gone, there's so many young women now that won't have that inspiration that Hannah could have gave them like she did when she was alive. And that's what pisses me off more than anything. Because she felt that she wasn't an inspiration to anyone, that she was alone. And if she wasn't alone, thanks for watching. My thoughts are with Hannah's family and the women of Stardom. I just want to say again, thank you, Great Muda, for inspiring me when I was bullied. And I want to tell all the young women out there, young and old, if you're being bullied online, there's always somebody out there that will be on your side. Just like when I was a kid, there was a kid that was on my side. I had inspiration to fight and stand up for myself. And I did that because of the Great Muda. And you just got to look to somebody to inspire you. When you're being bullied, social media is not all that important. You could delete your account. You being bullied at school, I'm not saying stand up and try to, but always have somebody to watch your back and inspire you to stand up for yourself. Because in today's time, bullying is not like it was in the 80s. I know that. Cyberbullying is a whole nother level, to where I'm seeing news feed of young women, young black women, Korean women, Asian women, Japanese women killing themselves because of people bullying them because of the way they look, or the way they built, or the way they act. And I just want to say that always look to somebody to inspire you to stand up for yourself and inspire you to be proud of who you are, regardless of what a bully says. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I can get back to doing Uno tomorrow.